Welcome back to Show Me the Proof, Get to the Point podcast. Been seeing a lot out there on the interwebs about intent. So, your intent to purchase, your intent for this or that. And I feel like we've said the word intent so many times, we don't know what it means. So we're here to kind of distill that down and break down a couple of different things that you can learn about intent channels, intent in um, SEO, and those types of things, and then whatever else we might be able to learn. This is Mike. I'm Chris. Here we go.
Yeah, let's do it. So, Chris, I think you're 100% right. The intent seems to be becoming one of those words or phrases that, as it gets used more and more often, it loses its meaning. Sort of like when people say they want to add value, it's like, okay, do you even know what that means anymore? Most people don't. It's like your value is not adding any value. I think intent is starting to become one of those things. It's like it's a buzzword. And I think a lot of people, when they use it, they don't really understand the nuances of intent. And they don't, and they just kind of say it because it's seemingly the right thing to say, but there's nothing behind it. So, I think that the first thing is like, what does intent even mean? Right. And I think the reality is intent there's a spectrum of intent, I guess you could say, where, you could have intent to research. You can have intent to solve a specific problem. You can have intent to purchase. Those are very different kinds of intent that require very different kind of experience. Right? We always like to talk about experiences. So if my intent is to learn or research, that requires an educational type of experience. If my intent is to purchase, how quickly can I get you over to sales? Right? Like, but there's a nuance there also of, all right, what does intent to purchase actually mean? There's a sliding scale within each of these, I think, as well, where how much intent do you really have? And I think a lot of this goes into, we often look at intent being measured by, at least how it should be measured, in my opinion, is, right, somebody is explicitly going and saying, I want to talk to sales, right? If we're talking in the B2B space, right? Or I want to get a demo, etc. But their level of intent behind that question could be very, very different depending on what's happened prior to. How educated are they? How much do they know about your company? How much do they know about the product or service category and the benefits? How much do they even understand about their own problems and challenges? So a lot of the times we look at, like, if we look at the form specifically, like the website form, the general best practice, I hate the word, but it's sort of, keep the form short because we want to decrease the amount of friction. The reality is the friction isn't created by the form as much as it is created by, like I said, everything that happens prior to. So how well are they educated? How much do they know about the company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? If the answer to all of those is nothing, then yeah, that 15 field form about, name, company name, phone number, email address, budget, tech stack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is going to fail, not because of how many fields it has, but because they don't know anything. So like that balance is shifted in the wrong, it's not balanced, I guess.
Yeah. And then what I'm hearing too is like the more clarity we can have around the intention, where this person is, the more tailored experience that they can have, which in theory is going to make every single part of the process as frictionless as possible.
100%. Yeah. And again, it's understanding what their intent is, right? And like, do they have intent to research versus to buy? And that's sort of the basic dichotomy, I guess we could talk about. And then within each of those, like, what do you actually need? And I think that's guided by where you've been before to a certain extent, right? So this is where, we talk about demand generation, et cetera. Like the more we can educate the customer up front, the more intent they're going to have when they actually come to us. Versus if we don't do a very good job educating, this is sort of this, concept of demand generation versus demand capture. If all we do is focus on capturing existing demand and don't do a ton of education up front, then yeah, two things happen. One is we're relying on our competitors for the most part to do the education. So how well do they do it? And what do they teach them before they come to us? And the other part is when they do get to us, what do they actually know? And how much intent do they actually have based on that information? So I think that also gets us into, you mentioned intent channels as a topic for discussion. So I think that's also important to understand where, a channel like search can be considered a high intent channel. Why? Because when you're typing something to a search engine, you have a question, right? Even if you don't ask a question, don't type in like a question query. Let's just say like, you know, how to or best, blah, 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 whatever. It's still, you're still asking a question. You're looking for an answer versus if we talk about social, it's usually not, you're not asking questions inherently. You might have questions in the back of your mind or problems you're trying to solve, but you're not specifically looking for something at that moment in time. Right. So it's more of a passive consumption rather than an active consumption. Um, so the types of content, types of information we put into lower intent channels like social and higher intent channels like search should be very different. So like as an example, if somebody is searching for, best ERP software, let's just say, um, they're looking for, that's maybe not the best example just because that's usually best handled by like a G2 or a Capterra or whatever. It's not oftentimes that a brand can have impact on that. But let's say it's like ERP software implementation. Go with the ERP example, right? That's something you as a ERP software provider can address. You can create maybe it's a framework for implementation that ensures that it's fast and efficient and covers all your bases or whatever, right? It could be a piece of content like that. Versus in social, you could still actually have a very similar piece of content, but it would be communicated and distributed in a different way, right? So maybe instead of a long form piece of content, you would create like a slider, let's just say. And that slider would pretty much communicate in a very short, condensed form the message that's within that long form piece, right? And that's just out there for your audience to consume as they may see fit, whenever it's appropriate for them. So, and again, this is also where, like, if you think about video content, interview style content, things like that, where it's more kind of general education that people can consume as they go rather than, hey, I have this very specific question about such and such. Sure, that can apply in social if, you can make a post on LinkedIn and ask about something particular and get people to respond to you in comments. That's fine, but that's not where you're often going to create content for that specific thing. So, let's stop there. Anything pop into your head that clarify or that you think I should clarify?
Yeah. So what you're saying too is how the person kind of starts the process. So whether it's on social, whether it's through search channels or something like that, maybe the channel that they're searching for, even if they're looking for the same information, um, that experience, the way that they would have consumed the information might be different. So it would be tailored to the channel that they're on. As
So yeah, 100%. The channel they're on impacts. It's an input into what kind of intent they potentially have in the first place, but then also it impacts the type of content and how they're probably going to want to consume content. for sure.
So my question around that is, say you have a very specific or a niche company, the product or service that they might provide someone, the people who are searching it might not know how to search for it. Does that make sense? But they could utilize or need that product or solution. So how could a company like that best provide these avenues or these intent channels or, whatever word choice you want to use for that to help them kind of, in that process, decrease friction, increase, uh, you know, awareness and all that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It's a segue from what we were just talking about. I think the what you're describing is, I think, very common in the sense of, if we look at the kind of continuum of someone's first completely unaware, then they become problem aware, then they become product aware, brand aware, and then, then they consideration, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think if, until somebody's problem aware from a demand generation perspective, one of the jobs that a marketer has for a niche company is to get more people to be problem aware, especially if you're in a brand new category, right? So your job is to create content and distribute that content in what we would generally call like lower intent channels, like social, to get people. You're not necessarily creating intent to buy just yet, but you're creating awareness of the problem that you might be able to solve for them down the line once that problem becomes big enough and a big enough pain point for them that it bubbles up to the top of their list, right? So, I'm trying to think of like a good example that's maybe more recent. I guess think about like in in your job, like video in sales has fairly recently become like a big deal, and still most salespeople don't use video, right? So it's a newer tool, a newer problem in terms of breaking through the clutter and that kind of communicating, right? So if we look at that as an example, um, you know, platforms like BombBomb and other and like Sales Reach that we use that really focus on video in the sales process. Part of their job is to make sales reps and sales leaders problem aware of, hey, kind of personal communication is a core issue that you need to solve for, like not just personalized, but breaking through the clutter, etc. So they have to create that and tell the story about the problem, so that people go, oh yeah, okay, I need a video tool. Like I know I have this problem. My whatever, my email response rates are going down, my connect rates are going down, all this stuff. Like you have to tell the story and enumerate the problem. Once the problem becomes a big enough pain point, now when people go to search, because they will at some point, and that search or research, right? And the research might be in the form of, sure, they could go to a search engine, type in, best video sales platform or best video platform for sales or something like that. But probably more likely is they're going to go to like a community like Rev Genius or Revenue Collective or whatever, and they're going to ask, hey, what platforms are you guys using for video for SDRs? Right. And they're going to get a bunch of recommendations. But ideally, before that even happens, you've educated them enough on the problem where they're almost kind of bypassing that step. And rather than asking, hey, which platform do you guys use? It's, hey, what do you guys think about platform XYZ? Right. Because that's where you've been getting your information from. Right. And then what happens is they might go and later search in a different channel, insert in the search channel to validate their decision. So they might go, okay, maybe they've gotten people to give them feedback on a particular tool, particular platform. They've gotten some other recommendations, and then they're going to go and search for something like best video platform for sales. They're going to come up with a Capterra and the G2 and the top results. and they're going to click on those and look at reviews and things like that to kind of validate their short list, let's just say, right? So I think in terms of, again, kind of what goes in which channel, that's sort of how I would think about it is um, educating someone on the problem first. Over time, they become problem aware. Then through that process, because you've been educating them, they also become brand aware or product aware, because your brand has been the one doing the education. And then when they're ready and it's a big enough issue, they're just going to come directly to you. At least that's the ideal case scenario, obviously. The other thing to kind of think about there, just because I've mentioned the difference between search and social and like that a couple of times, is, and also going back to the first question of what does intent even mean? What I think a lot of people get wrong is there's a difference between search intent and purchase intent, right? Um, and I think that just because somebody searches for you or for the problem that you solve doesn't actually mean they're ready to buy just yet, right? So that's where, um, again, as an example, if somebody searches for something like ERP software implementation best practices, okay, that's a very niche term, but their intent there is to solve a very specific problem. They're about to implement a piece of software. Probably if it's not you, it's probably your competitor, right? So they're not like dumping those people into some sort of ebook, or like let's assume you have an ebook about software implementation. Dumping them into a nurture cadence and pushing them over to sales is a complete waste of time. Like, right? So I think understanding what it is that their intent is based on their search term is really important. And again, there's a difference between search intent and that actual buying intent. And you understand buying intent by seeing, are they actually filling out my contact sales or demo form? Are they calling me? Right? I mean, some people still call, depending on the industry, things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes sense. And I think it does bring some, some clarity around intent and how to define it in, specific areas or reasons. And then ways that you can utilize that information to really help your clients, potential clients succeed in what they're trying to accomplish as well.
Yep. Yep. For sure. I mean, that's the overall goal with all this, right? Is to understand the customer, understand what, how you can help them in their job, and then create the right experiences based on the intent they have, all that stuff. So I think that's a wrap. Anyone's got questions about it,
Yeah.
you can reach out to us, find us on LinkedIn. Happy to chat.
Yep. Let us know.